Hi, this is Gertrude and you're watching Torrent's YouTube channel.
coldzera and Fallen are CS scores Tom Brady and Bill Belichick. Now, the reason why I use that model, that analogy, is because one of the debates that has raged throughout the entire time, basically the whole 2000s into the 2010s, that the Belichick and Brady Patriots have been one of the elite teams in the NFL, has been who is more key and who made who. Who's the one who really should be thanking the other one for their success? How does that relationship work? And the fascinating thing is that over time, we've had results that have all been excellent, but in different ways with different texture, sort of flavor, substance to them. The styles even changed. And so I actually think as I explain how coldzera and Fallen fit into this kind of a model, you'll see what I mean about both sets and why that whole thing of like who's more key, who was better, who made who, kind of falls apart a bit. Now, I will say immediately, first of all, we're obviously comparing things apples and oranges, two completely different things. The NFL is almost nothing like Counter-Strike. You use a totally different number of teams, different coaching system. Coaches can talk the whole time. Obviously, Bill Belichick doesn't play inside an NFL game. He is just the coach of the game. He's also, in theory, at one point in time, the general manager. And Fallen is literally the in-game leader, and he's had a coach in the past, so that doesn't work entirely. Obviously, coldzera is the star player of most of the SK lineups. Tom Brady is technically the star player of a number of the Patriots lineups. So the whole point is, it's an analogy and a model that works in certain senses to show aspects perhaps in a different light or contrast them. It's not about them being a one-to-one fit, because obviously that won't work. So, considering it this way, coldzera and Fallen are seen as the two central figures in the SK/Luminosity, now MIBR dynasty. They accounted for two majors, double-digit trophies won, countless top four finishes across big international tournaments, including 4 at majors. Together, they were one of the 1-2 punches in Counter-Strike in 2016, arguably, if not the best, the second best, maybe Scream and Shocks are better. Then again, they didn't have as many tournaments to win as deep. Then again, their team wasn't as good. You can go back and forth on that one. coldzera had tons of frags, rock solid, consistent performance, closes out the rounds. Fallen, high impact frags, aggressive positioning to apply map pressure, scout information, communicate to teammates so they know what's going on, make reads, wins crazy clutches himself, even if his raw stats aren't as nuts as some of the other top players in the world. But who's more key? Who stands out more? Let's look at the other ones. Tom Brady and Bill Belichick. So Tom Brady, quarterback of the New England Patriots, 5-time Super Bowl champion. Bill Belichick, the coach of the New England Patriots, also 5-time Super Bowl champion. Now, Bill Belichick is famous. I guess I'll go the other way around. Tom Brady is someone where, maybe in the middle of his career, he had a pretty good throwing arm. Doesn't have the craziest throwing arm. Doesn't have like early Peyton Manning throwing arm, current day Aaron Rodgers ability, but very good at knowing what passes to make, like very efficient, understanding of the system he's playing in, fantastic ability to scout opponents, read the game, fantastic player under pressure, very clutch, gamer in that sense, or comparable to coldzera in some senses there. Not necessarily known as the craziest aim, doesn't have the most bonkers, more mechanical aim, but very consistent, plays fantastically out of his system, always gets his own, is someone who makes the game-winning plays, but he's incredibly clutch, incredibly dedicated to the game, just like Tom Brady is. Then you go and look at the Fallen Belichick comparison. Bill Belichick, someone who has a very methodical way of approaching the game, has his own philosophy that he's built up over many years of playing with under different people, working under different people, studying with different people, putting together a fantastic coaching staff around himself, learning from others, adapting to what's going on in the game, making intelligent and shrewd roster moves to come in. Someone who mastered the defensive end of the game and was able to put together amazing teams doing that, built basically a dynasty doing that in the early days of the Patriots, was even doing that to some degree when he was over at the Cleveland Browns. And he's someone where you look at his impact on his squads, and the pieces he's brought in, many of them have been much better in his teams than they were elsewhere. Well, obviously there's a comparison to Fallen there, because I just talked about Fallen's skill set, but Fallen's someone where, first of all, the impact's more than just what he can do in a game. The impact's also who he brings in, how he taught them, what he trained them in, all those senses. So Belichick had a team before there was any Tom Brady that already was looking pretty good and was implementing a system and was starting to head absolutely in the right direction before he left the team, which is the Cleveland Browns. He'd already taken them into a very solid position from basically a team that was in oblivion. He took them in 1994 to an 11-5 record. They were second in the AFC Central. He had a coaching staff that he'd assembled, which is now somewhat legendary. Just go up, look up some of those names there, and you'll see the insane impact he's had. I mean, people like Nick Saban, are legendary in the college scene. So it's clear this was someone who already was having some degree of success implementing his approach, and his system already was someone who was going places and would have succeeded eventually, as we actually saw in the New England Patriots, where he was already in position to win the Super Bowl before Tom Brady was even playing in the games. Then you go over to Fallen. He had his Kaboom and Keyed Stars teams already at a pretty respectable level in international Counter-Strike, placing top 8 at majors, getting upsets off some high-level teams, some notable squads, and on maps those teams were strong on. And he was playing with, at the time, not great players, some relative nobodies actually, but he had his style of fundamental play. He focused on teaching his players, on teaching them to make the right play, to play when you have a man advantage around the man advantage, not around your aim. He had innovative strats and smokes, different approaches that throw opponents off, make them adapt, and then he can adapt to what they're doing. So then you go over. Bill Belichick was more influential on the style and strengths of the New England Patriots early on, especially because those were the teams, the ones that won the early 3 Super Bowls. They were based on defense. That was their strength. That was where their Pro Bowl players were. Tom Brady wasn't even initially playing. And then when he was, as famously everyone remembers from the first Super Bowl, he was playing as a game manager. He was playing under the direction of Belichick. His job was just manage the clock, allow the defense to do what they're going to do, let the kicker hit the field goals, make the right simple pass. Let's just grind out some offense here. That's why that first team was considered a defensive dynasty, and why actually early on, some of the hype around Tom Brady wasn't really warranted because he didn't have the opportunity to show off any of these things. He was very young still, and he was in an amazing system, and he was in a system that was based around the side of the ball that he doesn't play, the defensive side. Likewise, Fallen helped create the style that, yes, when Cold Zero got there into Luminosity, he was the star player of, but Fallen's the one who made the style that worked around Cold Zero. So that even when they did get Taco, FNX, Zeus, Cold Zero, obviously, they already had Cold Zero before. This was a time where it was Fallen that helped to build the system that was there. Cold Zero was already there. He wasn't like the best player in the world or anything. This team was an evolution of what Fallen had been doing earlier, in the same way as Belichick was with the Browns before and took that concept to the Patriots. His team in CSGO were one of the best drilled in the game. You could tell that because they were so adaptive. They were very durable in games. Even when they weren't actually winning championships yet, they were very, very close. They were taking people to 3 maps. That's always the sign of a great in-game leader or coach, because that's on-the-fly adaptations or timeouts or between round changes that's helping you get back into games, grind your way back in. Otherwise, if things aren't working and your players aren't playing well, you just lose games, you get blown out. It was so rare that Luminosity teams got blown out once they got their real lineup together, just as Patriot teams were so hard to beat because of that amazing defensive system and then the shrewd general manager approach of picking up players, just as Fallen was one of the people helping pick up players, and who to pick up, and picking up players you wouldn't necessarily expect to be that great, but they filled a specific niche that this guy could see would help. But then in come the stars, and the stars start to pull more of their weight and have more impact, because Tom Brady comes in, and after the defensive dynasty, the early parts of the 2000s, you get to the middle of the 2000s, and then especially the last sort of like 7, 8 years, well, I guess 10 years now, it's been more of an offensive team, but with a mix. Now, the key there is I don't mean more offensive than defensive. I mean, it was incredibly strong defensively before. Then it became like equally strong in that ridiculously put together 2017, which I think got to be one of the best GM jobs of all time. Became more of a mix of strengths, right? Well, you look at when Cold Zero really flourished. He was already there when they were Keyed Stars going into Luminosity, and he was a strong player still, like very strong rising talent. You could see like very good, but then again, had a whole system that was around him, had players and a style that certainly fit his strengths. But he really flourished when Luminosity got their good lineup, and this is when he started to become potentially world's best player, like MVP candidate, similar system, right? Similar approach. When you finally get the pieces and it's your time to go and you've been under a great leader figure, now you're really in position to become the best. Still, Cold Zero still helped by the system itself though, just as Tom Brady was. Now in the latter days, so in this context, we're going to talk about 2017 and onwards for Cold Zero and Fallen. And we're going to talk about, like I say, let's say like 2006 on for Tom Brady. I think that's more reasonable, like the 10 to 12 or 11 to 12 years. There was a period in the middle, 2017 for Cold Zero and Fallen. And obviously, I mean, basically like 2005 to what, like 2013 or something for 2014 or something for the Patriots, where Belichick and Brady blew a bunch of chances to win. Obviously, they had a couple of times they were in the Super Bowl. 2007, 2011, they were heavy favourites, massively so in 2007, probably the biggest favourite of all time. Didn't win the championship. Fallen and Cold Zero were heavy favourites to win PGL Krakow. They were supposed to win. They were beating FaZe every time they played them. They'd beaten Astralis. Astralis hadn't won tournaments in a while. They come into this tournament, they lost to Astralis. They didn't even make top 4. They failed that major. That was supposed to be one that was supposed to be theirs and cement a different type of dynasty, right? More of a skill-based one. More that Cold Zero could have been the main guy in, as opposed to like Fallen and him blended, with maybe Fallen having been the architect of the system. Then Belichick continued to shape players in the squad, and the latter day teams became almost an offensive dynasty, rather. Obviously, they won 2 Super Bowls, could have won this last one. That would have been 3 out of 4 again, would have been an offensive dynasty. This would have been more around, yes, pieces, but this is Brady at his absolute peak. Not individually as a prime player, as a physical player. His arm is nowhere near what it used to be. His physical ability is nowhere near what it used to be. Just watch the guy run. But his knowledge of the game, his mastery of the game, he was the guy doing all the game-winning plays. This is the guy that would steal away games, stole away Super Bowls from other teams when they were actually underdogs. Now they're winning, whereas before they were favourites in a number of scenarios. Likewise, okay, Fallen helped shape the team around the new recruits. He brought in someone like Phelps and adapted him to the squad. Suddenly they're winning all these championships. He brought in Bolts, a guy who'd come from a team that had won practically fuck all, and then they started winning a whole bunch of tournaments as well. Helped the team remain elite the whole time. S-class, world #1 at times. But you know what? A big part of those teams in 2017 coming in 2018 is Cold Zero. Because Cold Zero was carrying even harder, even more epic performances, more frags, more amazing rounds, more clutches, more games where even when they're losing, he puts in a godlike performance, gives you a chance to win, gives you a chance to get to the third map where someone else can have a great game. The interesting thing as well is there's also been this creative tension between the pairs. Despite the fact from the outside, when you see them win so much, you think, oh, they must just love each other. Brady and Belichick didn't always get along, especially in these latter seasons. You've heard the rumblings. Maybe Belichick wanted to replace Brady, actually. He thought he was too old. Maybe Brady didn't always like the way Belichick coached things. Obviously, not even put Malcolm Butler in that last Super Bowl could have cost them the Super Bowl, in theory, it would appear. Fallen and Cold Zero have had their times as well. They had the in-game leader swap that seems to have been initiated by Cold Zero, taking away Fallen's primary role. They had the recruitments, bringing in Stewie 2K, bringing in Tarek. Are these players Fallen actually wanted, primarily? But then again, you hear the stories. Cold Zero had offers from FaZe. Later, he even himself let it leak that he hinted that he wanted to potentially go to Team Liquid. These sound like someone saying, you better get talents in, otherwise I'm not going to keep playing with this team. I'm still at my prime. I've got to be able to win right now. You see, that's the thing. The star wants to win right now. The architect wants to build something stable and big for the future. Those can be different philosophies, but the creative tension between the two can be what helps you win and win now and consistently, because you can blur the two and have some of each and do both, actually. That's what's amazing about dynasties like this. But just as Brady didn't really get his offensive dynasty, yeah, likewise, Cold Zero didn't get his star player dynasty, did he? He was amazing when he was in the other one, but he wasn't like, it was the more skill-based one of 2017, which could have actually been formed if they'd have won PGL Krakow. Sadly, they missed out on that, didn't they? And because they missed out on it, well, so be it. Then you've got to consider, these teams didn't used to blow people away, with the exception of SKESL1 Clan, which was a very dominant team. Generally, you go and look, and in all these different eras, they're winning incredibly close games. They're winning out of being clutch, out of making the big plays, out of being cool under pressure, out of being gamers and never giving up in a game and grinding back and going to 3 maps and winning our map and have a close game there and going to the decider and having more heart than other people. You know, all these factors. You think of all the championships the Patriots have won. I think there's some stat they've won them all by like 5 points or less, and tons of them on like a field goal kicked or game-winning drive. Like, it's always very, very close. That's why these guys are legends, but it's also why it's clear it's the synergy between the two. It's not just like, we had the best running back, oh, we had the best wide receiver, we had the best raw quarterback of all. No, that's not really the way it is. Likewise, is Cold Zero the most skilled player ever? No, probably not. Is Fallen the best in-game leader ever? I don't know. It's quite debatable, actually. The point is, you can make the cases for all of them, but together, you ask, as a combo, are they the best? I think it's somewhat inarguable in both sports, in the NFL and CSGO, right? The combo is pretty fucking insane for CSGO, just as it is for the NFL. So in summation, at this level of accomplishment and with this nature of accomplishment, it's pretty unlikely it's going to be either that, like, oh, it was mainly just this guy and the other guy rode his coattails. No, that's pretty unrealistic, right? Pretty disrespectful and misses a lot of the nuance of the game, to be honest. But the creative tension between them certainly is a big factor, because then what does overlap will become amazing chemistry. It's what you can agree on and what you can agree to work on. And the stuff you eschew is the stuff that probably would have led you down a dead end or made it have temporary success but then fall off afterwards. They have a lot of great qualities. Some that are similar, like I said, with Fallen and Colts, clutch guys who read the game very well, cool under pressure. Same things with Brady and Belichick, by the way. Likewise, drive for both pairs, constantly focused on becoming number one. Make the hard cuts that you need to. Famously, Bill Belichick learned that piece of advice from the guy who was, I think it was the guy who was the, let me think. I think it was the guy who was like the general manager of the, was it the Dallas team he was the general manager of? I think it might have been. Or was it the 49ers? One of them. And he basically told him, Belichick, like, it's better to cut a player a year early than a year late. And Fallen has absolutely lived by that mentality. He's been someone who's been like, right, this player's starting to go downhill. We've still got a team that can win. Is there a player we can get him now, and let's just start winning again? Like, let's not let this peter out completely, like the NIPs, Fanatics, Virtus Pros, basically even Astralis, every other great team did. Just let it run to the very end and then make the changes when you absolutely had to at the end. No, these guys keep winning because they make the hard cuts. So likewise, these are people who are driven to win. They have the killer instinct, both as player and as architect of the squad. It's also more interesting, I think, to use a model like this, just to observe how their influence might have shaped different periods. You're not saying it's one or the other, but how one had an impact here and the other hadn't had a chance yet to, but then when he got a chance to be more of a focal point, he did something here, and the other one got to take a backseat. It was cool, and he was winning as well. Now, if I was forced to pick, if for some reason I have a gun against my head and I have to pick one of each, bizarrely, I actually might pick the two architects, Belichick and Fallen. Even though I think Tom Brady and many other teams probably would have won championships, would be a very, very good player. I don't think he would have won as many. I don't think he would have won in that fashion. I don't think he would be considered as much of a legend he is now. I think he'd be a very good player. What do I think if Cold Zero was in a different team? Again, first of all, it's a bit unfair because he's come from Brazil. There's not many great teams there. But I think he could have been one of the world's best players. If he could have gotten into a good team, I think he could have certainly won championships and been a star player and had some MVP awards. I don't think he'd be thought of as the beast he is today. I think you've seen when he doesn't have the system around him and when he hasn't had players like Taco, FNX, supportive elements around him, I think he hasn't been as good. I think he's been good in other ways, but he hasn't had that same complete mastery of the game. And that was also a part I also thought personally always helped Brady is like, yeah, he didn't have always the great superstar players. He definitely had some amazing offensive weapons in the last 10 years. But the pieces he did have around him, because they were so well picked by the architect, they were ones where he knows the small thing that guy can do. And that guy isn't really like a Pro Bowl receiver, despite the fact some of them got named. I'm talking about some of the lesser ones here. But they would make them look like it in these games with the Patriots because they know how to use those guys. They know exactly the route that guy can run and when to throw it to him. And if you have a player who can then execute that because he's got the right mind for the game, because he's a chess player like a Fallen, like a Tom Brady is, specifically more Fallen in 2016, 2015, then you can make that work. So if I had to pick, I'd pick the architects personally, because I believe these architects, given a new chance to create something and a new set of resources and access to stars and talent, I think they could create potential future dynasties. I think the stars are very, very good, but in some sense, I think they need the others a little bit more, even though obviously in the game, they're the ones doing the most. So it's always going to be tough to break it down that way, but I thought it would be an interesting little digression for my channel and bring in another sport a little bit. This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Gardner Wilson, Andreas Snazor Westerland, Alex Adams, Eddie Wingfors, Daniel Yordanov, Robert Baxter, Travis Greb, Kyla Harris, James Harding, Caesar, and special thanks go out to Matt Shakowski and Jerky's Minion in particular. Want teasers for my upcoming content? How about asking me a question for my monthly AMA? Do you want to take part in a discussion about esports with me? How about suggesting a topic or a guest for my content? Put your money where your mouth is and join the Skrilluminati today.